All right.
No.
Call this session of the Bandon Planning Commission to order. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Orsi, Commissioner Scobie, Vice Chair Jerkowski,
Here.
Chair Starbuck,
Here.
Commissioner Norman,
Yes.
Commissioner Frey,
Here.
Commissioner Pressler.
Here.
Thanks.
All right, moving on, consent agenda. Any additions, comments?
I'll just make a note that we did receive a public comment about the minutes with a request to change, here it is, request to change the way that we refer to people. So we've been given the guidance to not ask people for their address at meetings and rather to represent themselves as either a resident of Bandon or someone who lives outside of Bandon. In speaking with our city recorder, we also want to add an additional title maybe that we can give people, which is a business owner in Bandon. There's some concern maybe that listing people as not living in the city or not non-residents might be might make it seem like their testimony is less important, which it is not. So I would encourage you to read the public comment submitted and maybe make a motion if you felt like it to add a change to the minutes to represent that person as a business owner.
All
So
right,
take a minute to read that if you need to.
any comments on this? Is there a motion to move ahead on this?
I will make a motion.
Second. All right, motion to include,
Do you need us to say what the motion is?
Yes, I do. I just need you to say what the motion is that you're making.
I move that we amend the minutes to show that Sherry McGrath is a business owner rather than a non-resident in the minutes.
Thank you.
Second. All right, motion to change the minutes to include abandoned business owner, or to modify this to state that the person being presenting a case to the commission and be specified as a business owner.
That's correct. And then maybe should the motion also be to approve the minutes? It also.
Right,
Okay, perfect.
okay. We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passed. Now, we want to approve this consent agenda.
I think you just approved the consent agenda by approving the minutes. Is that correct?
Well, we made this change. This is a
Oh.
change.
Got it.
This
So
is a modification.
okay,
So we have to correct. We have to approve the consent agenda with the modifications.
perfect.
I make a motion to approve the consent agenda with noted correction.
Second.
All right. Motion made and seconded to accept the consent agenda as amended. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Public comment. You have 5 minutes to come forward and make a comment on anything that's not on the agenda. Seeing nobody making that movement, let's move on to discussion items. Code cleanup, part 2. Staff.
All right, I've got a presentation for you. I did put a copy in front of you, as I mentioned. There's some text on this. So just to remind you, last month we passed what I'm calling Code Cleanup Part 1 to the City Council, and that is going to them on December 2nd for their public hearing. There were a few items that we felt like needed more time. So we'll just be discussing the ones that you identified last time. I've got them up here in a presentation and some questions to go alongside them so we can just get some stuff cleared up before we start the noticing process for Part 2. Just as a reminder, we do have to provide notice to the Department of Land Conservation and Development in advance of our initial public hearing. So this is not a public hearing. This is just a work session to make sure we're all on the same page before we initiate that public hearing process. I would anticipate then that we would have a public hearing either in January or February to consider the other changes. So if you can go to the next slide. Okay, so the items that we discussed in not in great detail last time and didn't really get to are the property line adjustments, the Title 17 tables and reorganization. We had a couple issues that we needed to work through, the special use standards, and then the supplementary provisions, in particular the view line. So I think there's some that you might say, we have no issue with this, we feel comfortable moving it on, and I'm totally fine with that, but I wanted to bring each one to you as an option. So if you can go to the next slide. Okay, so the first one is property line adjustments. The proposal here is to require draft deeds to require property line adjustments be only between legal lots of record and not allow any non-conformities. To disallow any action if the if a prior approval limits the ability to adjust those property lines. And then also a big one would be requiring the maintenance of access to utilities and public rights of way. So property line adjustments, just to remind everyone, are when you're not creating or removing any lot, you're just moving a property line between the boundaries. So a lot of times it'll go like this to like this. We had one recently where the property lines, two properties abutted an open street and had each had utility access, and then in doing a property line adjustment, they would have removed one of the access points for a utility and have to extend a water line. Ultimately, that gets kicked down the road because our code doesn't have anything in it that says that those utilities have to be maintained when you do that property line adjustment. So we just want to clarify, and that's pretty common, and looking at other codes, a lot of other cities have that requirement, so that was just something we were missing. So the reason why we're doing this is just to have some additional approval criteria to make sure that property line adjustments are not negatively impacting the folks who are going to buy those properties or develop them next. Do we have any issues or questions around the property line adjustment changes? Okay, I'm going to move on to the next one. So the table reorganization, we've been talking about this one for a long time. The reason why we're doing this is just because there's a lot of duplicated information. We want to limit the number of times we're saying the same word. And so we opted to put all of those chapters into a table. I also think what it's helped me see, and some other people that I've talked to, is just how many different uses that we have and how many uses are, like there's a use that would be allowed in one zone. And so is there a way to sort of lump that into something else or group that together to just eliminate these multiple similar but separate uses? So if you go to the next slide. We've talked about this, I call it the similar use doctrine. It's this part of our code that says the Planning Commission may rule that a use not specifically listed in the allowed uses of a zone shall be included among the allowed uses if the uses of the general type and similar to the other allowed uses. So the idea is, and we went through this with the amusement arcade, is that if we want to, we can include things that would be a similar impact in an existing use. You guys are allowed to make that determination. However, the second part of this that I bolded for you says this does not authorize the inclusion in the zone where it is not listed this is kind of confusing, but of a use specifically in another zone. So the idea is if, and this came up last time, self-service laundry is explicitly allowed as a conditional use in Old Town Commercial, which means technically it's not allowed in any other zone. So if it's called out in one place, then it can't be automatically considered commercial retail sales and services in another. So I think this is a good exercise to see them all laid out and say what's similar and what's not. So we can come back to this if we want to, but I just wanted to go over that because I think a lot of the issues that were raised at the last meeting can be solved by using this particular code that allows you to make similar use determinations. So maybe the first issue that came up, or that I had in my notes, was the live work residential, which is currently allowed in the light industrial zone, but not allowed anywhere else. We did propose adding a section of the code that said that was called mixed use, and it essentially says that if, let's say, having a commercial retail sales and services and a single family dwelling are allowed in the same zone, then you can have those two uses in the same building. Our code currently doesn't describe that or allow it, so we have these things like live, work, sell residential that say specifically in this area, you can have a dwelling attached to a commercial use, which is intended to be occupied by the owner. It kind of goes on, and I think the issue with having live, work, sell listed in a specific zone is that it means then you can't do that in another zone. Unless you explicitly also allow live, work, sell in another zone. So the mixed use addition is sort of then in conflict with live, work, sell residential. So I think the question here is it possible, or do you think that having that language that says mixed use, where two uses would be allowed in one property, is similar enough to live, work, sell residential to group those two together and just get rid of live, work, sell residential and allow in any zone someone to live, work, sell, as long as those uses are all outright permitted? Does that make sense?
It's mixed use, so you're proposing mixed use to replace these other items.
Well, the definition of what would be mixed use would be any zone that has multiple like allowed uses that you could combine those into one building. That you adding that provision in then allows you to do that in any zone.
So my question is, in the planning world,
Yes.
does mixed use have a standardized definition? That's number one. And is it explicit enough for people to understand?
Sure. I think that's a good question. So the first question on, is there a standard definition? I think the standard definition is usually that there's commercial and residential in the same building. We can certainly define it further if we wanted to have mixed use further defined in the definitions chapter. In the code, the mixed use section, I can pull it out for you if you want. We read it into the record last time. Says, let me get it for you real quick. Uses allowed individually are also allowed in combination with one another in the same structure or on the same site, provided all applicable development standards and building code requirements are met. So to me, yeah, I think that the definition of mixed use or that particular provision defines mixed use sufficiently to continue to use it in the code.
So mixed use involves the combination of commercial and residential, but not industrial?
I think it could. I mean, like I said, I think the definition that's in there just says any allowable uses in the zone. So like we can try to come up with an example of like in the R2 zone, you could have urgent care pharmacy, which is a conditional use on the same property as a clinic or office outpatient. Right now, our code, our code's not clear about whether or not that's allowed. It's come up more with properties that have a commercial space and want to have a residential space. And if there's a single family dwelling allowed in the zone and also commercial retail sales and services, because other parts of our code specifically call out residential apartments that are accessory or this live, work, sell residential, it's really hard then to allow it in zones where it's not explicitly called out because of that similar use doctrine.
Okay, so
I know it's kind of complicated. I'm trying to figure out how to say it in a less convoluted way.
well, I can't get over the first sentence actually with all of the uses.
Yes, I know. I realize the way that it's like written in our code is kind of
So
interesting.
So if I live in an apartment in Old Town, which happens to be above a laundromat,
Sure, great example.
is that mixed use?
Yes,
Okay,
I think so.
but so a laundromat is industrial, it's not commercial necessarily, right?
Well, in our code, it's I think it's its own thing, but I think it's in commercial. I think of industrial, let's see, what's industrial? Like the cheese factory is in the industrial zone. That's like they're processing cheese. We have a couple other, like, I think there's a metal fabricator down there. So I think the idea originally was to allow people to make a craft, essentially, like fabricate metal and also live in the building and also sell stuff. So they were sort of mixing all these uses together. If the industrial zone allows you to do metal fabrication, commercial retail sales and services, and single family dwelling, then that mixed use language that we'd be adding in would just allow you to do that without any specific definition of live, work, sell residential. Does that maybe help clarify it?
Not necessarily, but I think what I would say is that, I mean, we have to, I'll speak for myself. You're the expert on this, and so we have to trust that you know what you're talking about. At least I feel that way. And so I guess we move on from there.
I mean, I want you all to feel extremely comfortable with it, and there's no rush. I mean, we can honestly take as long as we want to feel good about what we're passing on to the city council.
Well, I don't
So-
know, I don't know as we're gonna,
It might
I don't
be
know if this
better.
is gonna, in February, I don't know if we're gonna be clear than we are here in November. You know?
It might be better to see this in writing when you give us a draft
Sure. Yeah.
and see how it plays out.
Yeah, so it's in, I mean, the language hasn't changed in the code version that you had from last month. So you can look back at that and take this presentation home and think about it, and we can have another work session to talk through these ideas. But I think in general, the idea is to narrow down the number of uses that we have, to just make it more clear to people what's allowed and what's not. Because I think there is some confusion when one part of our code says, residential units as long as they're accessory to an outright permitted commercial unit or use. And then another place it says apartments, and then in another place it says live, work, sell residential. It's very unclear to staff also, like, what does all of that mean? Wouldn't it just make more sense to allow, if you allow dwellings and you allow commercial uses, to allow them in the same building? But let it settle in, we'll think about it.
Well, I think just the whole process in general, whenever one is going about streamlining things, I think the question always has to be asked, what's being lost? Maybe not, maybe nothing.
I think that's a great question.
Maybe the only thing we're losing is confusion among the citizens who come in and because they have a project they want to do, you know, which is fine. Then we don't mind them losing their confusion, but are we losing anything out? Are we losing anything of value? So,
I think that is a great question to ask. And so I can contemplate that as well. And maybe you guys can think about these issues that have come up and see if there's any unintended consequences that might come out of making these changes. We can think through that.
But if we agree to.
Oh, your microphone. Mine was doing that the other day. I think if you toggle it on and off. Is it working? The eye is on.
Yeah,
Oh,
okay.
there you go.
So if we say we're fine with mixed use or we're not fine with it, it's just an advisory thing that gets passed on to the city council. So I think we could make a decision and pass it on, and then it can be debated further.
yeah, I'm not suggesting that we string this out and frustrate ourselves. But I do think that I'm just trying to understand what the changes, you know, basically. And I'm imagining myself as being a citizen who lives inside the city boundaries, not outside.
Yes.
That if I'm going to come in here and I've got my little project and I've read the abandoned municipal code, am I going to still have to be taking up 3 hours of your time explaining every sentence to me? You know what I'm saying?
Yes, yeah.
I mean, that's the point of the streamlining is to hopefully staff is less involved, right? Because people come in better prepared because they understand everything in writing is explicitly understood.
I think that's the goal, is to empower the public to be able to read this and actually know what could, I mean, it's not even just for people who are coming in and developing, but we get people who want to know what can be built next to them. And that can be really hard to figure out, I think. And when there's a lot of these like differently defined things that are sort of unclear. So that's where I come from thinking about this, but I don't think, again, like, I think maybe, rather than drilling down into some of the specifics, you can just give me some feedback about whether or not you like mixed use. And if there are certain zones maybe where it's not appropriate, or certain areas, and I can, if it would be helpful, I could even come up with some examples using the code to just say, like, here's something someone might come in with. How do you feel about that? Because that could then show you just how it would play out in reality.
I personally love the term mixed use. I've been using it for years, in different contexts. So I don't have a problem with it as long as we all understand what it is.
Mhm.
And if it's something more than commercial and residential, then it needs to be stated. If it can be also industrial, fine. You know, we just need to have a mutual understanding of that. That's all.
I think that's definitely valid, and maybe, yeah, something that you could do too is look at the packet from last month. And if you go down any of the lines, right, where it says like not permitted, permitted, conditional, if you just look at anything that's permitted or conditional, then you would know what type of mixed use someone could suggest. So we'll come up with some examples though.
Some real imagination in coming up with something.
Yeah, and
Village, just by going down that grid.
absolutely, because I look at it and I think, okay, so in an R1 zone, you could have a church, a medical center, a community service building, a public park, a school, a community club, a parking lot, like you can, there's a variety of things that someone could submit. So I think if there, yeah, I think that you can look at that and see if there's any combinations that feel icky. And then there's only so much that we can do. I mean, if something's already allowed in the zone, we can't take that right away from someone without issuing a Measure 56 notice. So we really don't want to be getting into that. But I think there's still opportunity to sort of confine mixed use to specific zones or areas if we don't want to allow it everywhere.
Right.
So, okay.
I would also like to say to end this part of the discussion, that in my opinion, even though our recommendations are only advisory because we don't make the decision, the city council does, I think that, you know, the more work that we do and the more agreement that we mutually have makes it easier for them. And it's not like they don't have anything else to do, you know, so.
Yes, I agree. And they tend to defer to your judgment here, and they do take it seriously if you've spent time thinking through things. So I appreciate all of your input. So any other thoughts on the mixed use? I know Jan's on Zoom, so I just want to take a second in case she needs to unmute. Okay, so then
Yes,
the.
yes, I do have a question.
Yeah,
So I just want to clarify. So to me, mixed use means you've got a zone where you have, you know, residential, commercial, that kind, not all in one building. That's what I think of as mixed use. But what you're describing is using mixed use as one building, using it for multiple uses. Is that my understanding?
I think it could be either. So at least in the code definition here, it would be allowed in combination with one another in the same structure or on the same site. So I think you're right that it could be, like, I think of mixed use as well, like a mixed use neighborhood where you have an apartment building and a strip mall and a park and a school.
Well, and that's my point, is by using mixed use, which to me, the common is when you have an area where you've got, I kind of like the live, work, sell residential, just because to me that's different than mixed use. To me, mixed use could be a single building with, you know.
Are you concerned that they're gonna be thinking it's limited to just be putting everything in one building? Is that what your concern is?
Well, my concern is we're using it to mean using on one property. To me, mixed use is a zone where you have different things permitted. That's what I think of as mixed use. But what it sounds like we're now using the term for is on one property, we have different uses, different permitted uses on one property or in one building. I just wanted to make sure that there couldn't be confusion caused by that, by the term mixed use, I guess is my thought.
Yeah, I can do a little research too and see if other codes define these things differently. The mixed use definition I pulled was from the state model code. I think you make a really good point. And so it's possible that under those initial definitions that we have, that maybe mixed use could describe different uses on the same site or in the same neighborhood, but not necessarily in the same building. We could look into see how other folks define that.
Well,
I'm
this
more-
this already says that it's with one another in the same structure, which is the same building or on the
Right.
same site.
Yeah, that's the definition that I pulled from, or the language that I just pulled from the state model code, but we can see if there's another a different way of doing things to make it more clear when it's in the same building versus on the same site or something.
So both options are what we are aspiring to, like it could be in that area or it could be in that property. We're not trying to eliminate anything. We're just trying to clarify.
That's correct. Yeah, because again, going back to that similar use language that right now, because it's out explicitly allowed in certain zones, that means it's not allowed in other zones. And I'm not sure, like, for example, the jetty would be a place where commercial uses are allowed, residential uses are allowed, but our code wouldn't allow them in the same building because other zones already say explicitly that those two things are allowed together only if certain things are happening as an accessory.
Okay.
Something like, does that make sense? So if it's allowed somewhere else, it can't be explicitly then allowed in a chapter where it's not, it wouldn't be allowed in another zone where it's not explicitly allowed.
Okay.
Yeah, hopefully I said that correctly.
So I'm used to mixed use being used in the reference to neighborhoods.
Yeah,
But the city, in most instances, is not gonna be dealing with an application for development to encompass an entire neighborhood. They're going to probably be looking at it in the context of an individual property or an individual building, right? There's a
Yes.
difference between the property and a building, right?
Mhm.
So, I mean, as long as we have those all covered,
Yes, and I mean, it's a good point because the term, now we're going back to what's the standard definition? You asked the key question in the beginning, because I think we have referenced certain zones like our CD1 zone, which is Beach Loop Drive, as being a sort of mixed use zone because we allow hotels and restaurants and residential uses. So I think there's a good point to be made about the way that we use that term. It needs to be better defined. Because it could be describing an area or a specific site. So I'm gonna see how other cities handle this sort of thing. And I'll get back to you on that one.
Okay, go ahead, move on.
Okay, so then the next slide. So one of the other questions that came up was about public park and recreation facilities, which are allowed outright in the Old Town Commercial Zone and conditionally allowed in R1, R2, CD1, C2, C3, and public facility. So, and that's our code now as it is. But then kind of interesting that in the natural resources zone, public parks are allowed outright, as well as low intensity recreational uses, which do not include structures. So I think there's just a question of, this came up last time of could we say that public park and recreation facilities are allowed in the natural resources zone? And then just put an asterisk on that one that says, except you cannot have structures in it. Or do you feel like those are two completely different things? We sort of talked about this last time of them being of public parks potentially being high intensity versus, what is low intensity recreational uses. And so I think that just the question there is, should they remain separate? or be lumped together.
So is a structure a building or a jungle gym?
Our code definition for structure is kind of insane, but it's anything man-made, composed of materials, off the ground. It's very long, but so structure can be anything. We did a couple years ago make an exception to the structures for any landscaping materials. And I think we called out some specific like vegetative or landscaping things like raised garden beds, but otherwise structure is everything else. So I think the idea of like in a natural resources zone, a public park is really just that. It's not a playground. It doesn't allow all sorts of different things in it. That's sort of how I read that low intensity recreational uses, which do not include the use of structures. But I think, I mean, yeah, the idea now, I mean, we can go back and amend that later or make a better determination about what that should be. But I think the question now for the reorganization is just, do those uses fit within public park and recreation facility, or are they separate? And these are not, I just want to say, these are not easy questions to answer. So, I mean, we can also, again, we'll have more time. You can think about it. There's no rush, but
Dana, what's an example in Bandon of one of our natural resources zones?
Johnson Creek
Johnson, Creek.
and the Ferry Creek area are, I believe, the only two.
Ferry Creek where?
I believe that the, let's see, directionally challenged, but over like behind Face Rock Creamery, I believe there's an area that's zoned natural resources and the Ferry Creek sort of watershed, and the city owns most of that land.
With the FEMA new regulations coming up anyway, you're not gonna put a structure on them anyway.
That's a really great point. So, yeah, it might not matter. Yeah, no, that's a valid point.
We have to like put all the puzzle pieces together. We have all this stuff flying at us from different
Mhm.
directions right now.
Yeah,
Raising sea levels, FEMA regulations, etc.
yeah, yeah. So that's a good point. And for those of you not at the presentation on Monday, all of Johnson Creek is in the floodplain. And Ferry Creek would be in the same situation. So it would be pretty challenging to put structures there regardless.
Well, and we don't really know what's going to happen in the future. Next year at this time, there may no longer be a FEMA. So, you know,
Also possible.
But there might also be the change of it could flood in different places than it has in the past, depending on what hits our area, because we can't control the weather
Right.
and the climate.
Yeah, and I'll point out too that, I mean, we can also change, like amend the definition, like public park and recreation facility. I think we can look at the definition of that and just make sure that that meets what you're thinking of, because I do think public park can mean a whole lot of different things. And low intensity recreational uses without structures is definitely more like more narrowly defined. But the other thing I can do is look at the natural resource zoned area and see if any of it is not public, because that would maybe make it a little bit easier. I think that came up last time about the fact that the term is public park and recreation facilities. So maybe that would help.
Sure.
Okay.
Maybe the problem is the word public.
I mean, I think, yeah, a lot of the natural resource or the natural resource zoned areas just in general now, I think are all in public hands, so. I'll double check. There could be still areas of natural resource that are privately owned. Okay, so we can come back to that one, but this will be your homework, is to think through whether or not these two things specific in the natural resource zone can be lumped into that public park and recreation facility. Okay, next slide. So a couple other questions that came up, I think, and this again goes back to like that similar use is, does aquatic center have to be defined specifically, or could it fit within commercial retail sales and services or some other use within the code? I mean, I think again, you run into, if you add in a specific use, then you can never say, we actually think that that's whatever else in the zone. So, think about that one. I don't know if anyone has any initial thoughts on that. Aquatic center being separately defined, is it different in scope from other, from a public park and recreation facility, from a, let's see, or even like a community service office or a community club or building, museum, tourist information center, and outdoor recreation facility? I think just where does aquatic center fit in, or is it just a commercial retail sales and service?
I think it needs to be defined specifically.
Okay,
That's how I would approach it.
But it could be private or public, right? Is it a public park if it's publicly
I
operated?
mean, that's a great point. Yeah, that's where that term public can get in the way. Okay. So we can come up with something for aquatic center. I'm not sure if that's gonna be in the code cleanup or not, but it's a good thing to think about. Is anyone opposed to having it defined specifically? No, okay. And then the other question that came up was, we just called stuff public utilities. In the code right now, it says editorially amended to include service structures. I started looking through the definitions of our code to figure out if any of these things are actually defined and to figure out why would a service structure be any different than just saying public utilities. I think where it came from is that public utilities are generally underground. A service structure would be like the pump station or something else that would be more of a like physical structure. But then I looked in our definitions chapter and we already have utility facility, which kind of includes everything, which makes me think then we should just change that language to from public utility to utility facility. And then also I thought it was funny, there's no definition of public facility, but there's public improvement, which means the development of public facilities.
I think service structure is useless.
I've
It's not clear what that is.
Yeah, so I think though, if you changed it right now from public utility to utility facility, that is actually already defined in our code for whatever reason. It's the only place it's found, but we could just change it from public, what was it? Public facility to utility facility, and then we have a use that matches a definition that includes all of the related structures. Does that solve that one?
Sounds reasonable.
Okay. We're gonna go with that. As long as there's no complaints on that
Is a
one.
cell tower or phone lines, are they a utility?
Those are separate, so we do have a cell tower overlay zone that would be defined separately. Yes. Okay, next slide. This is where self-service laundry also came up. It's only, it's explicitly listed as a conditional use in Old Town. However, as noted at the last meeting, we actually do have 2 self-service laundry facilities in the general commercial zone. So I think the question is, do you think that this would fit in with commercial retail sales and services? And thus, we would just make an amendment to the code to get rid of self-service laundry specifically. Just to be clear, retail sales and services is defined in our code right now. It means sells, leases, rents, new or used products, goods, or services, excludes recreational, medical, marijuana facilities, auto repair, and other uses defined separately. So then the other option is to, if you wanted self-service laundry to continue to be separate from commercial retail sales and services, so you're not having those on, let's say, like Beach Loop Drive or the Jetty, then we can just make self-service laundry outright permitted in the general commercial zone. Could be an easy fix as well.
Is self-service laundry different than a Dairy Queen?
Oh, are you asking me, like, is
Yes.
the impact different?
Yes.
Probably not.
Then why do we have self-service laundry
You're the planning commission?
identified?
I'm honestly not sure. I think it's probably goes back to, there was a desire, I think, to keep Old Town more commercial, or more tourist commercial. And so, I don't know that there was an interest in having like everyday sort of things in Old Town. So that's probably why they listed it as a conditional use.
You mean city infrastructure in Old Town? You don't want that in Old Town.
I'm saying that I think when the code was written, they wanted things like restaurants and shops and that sort of thing, and not necessarily like an auto dealership and self-service laundry. But I think you're right in that it doesn't, I think the impact is very similar. So it's just, I think whether or not you want to keep it as a conditional use or allow it to be outright permitted.
So if you didn't specify, sorry if this is becoming overly involved, but nonetheless. So if you didn't specify self-service laundry and somebody wanted to put, so you struck that from the code and somebody wanted to put a self-service laundry in Old Town, you know, somewhere near Coastal Mist or something like that. There wouldn't be any way to, you pretty much have to permit that, is that right?
That's right. It would be outright permitted.
I think.
Which the Coastal Mist may not appreciate.
I was
They
gonna,
might like it because people are gonna go in while they're doing their laundry.
And get a coffee.
That's
I don't
that's
know.
true. That's, we could actually find a use for the old Minute Cafe building.
There you go. Could be self-service laundry.
There you go.
Yeah, so I think you have two options, which is to absorb self-service laundry into commercial retail sales and services, which then it becomes outright permitted in Old Town. Or you keep it as a conditional use and you add the permitted use to the commercial zone.
I think I like the second one better.
Same.
Yeah,
Conditional use in Old Town.
okay. You don't have to make a decision tonight, but
Yeah.
I'll just like make that
Take my
note in the
opinion.
code to change.
I've
Okay.
lived here long enough that I think that would probably be better solution for the community.
Okay. Perfect. Okay, next slide. We're through all of the reorganization stuff, I think. So then, special use standards, this is where in that table, we would change it to an S. If it was permitted, but with special standards, that would be things like home occupations, accessory dwelling units. I think aquaculture was another one. So this is just a way to put things that are allowed, but as long as they meet certain parameters that are clear and objective in its own chapter. Is everyone okay with that one? Okay. That one, just so you know, the reason for that is right now we put a lot of stuff in supplementary provisions, which is the last chapter of the code, and no one ever looks there for those things. It'd be great to have something up front with the other zones that we can just hand out to people. Okay, and then shoreland overlay, this is also another one. Right now, residential uses are conditional uses because of the clear and objective housing rules. We have to allow it as outright permitted. I checked surrounding codes like Port Orford, they allow them outright. So the proposal would be to just change residential uses in the shoreland overlay to outright permitted. Again, to Sally's point, there are many other layers when you're within the shoreland overlay. The FEMA floodplain requirements that will change everything anyway, but it does then allow us to just have an easier process to permit those things. Everyone's okay with that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And then the last one is just I think that's the last one, the view line. So we talked about this last time. The only change, actually, can you go to the next slide? I'll just go right to the proposed language. The only change that was requested last time was that it would be changed to ocean and river views. And this is just a reminder that the shoulds were changing to shalls, and that we'd still have that language in there. Protection of views from vacant building sites shall also be taken into consideration for some of those interesting lots. I think there's still a way to have a view line or ordinance and still leave us some flexibility for those weird lots, but make it clear and objective.
Because that sounds easy to do.
Well, we're trying. I mean, right now, I think I mentioned this last time, is that the view line is really hard to enforce. I mean, we can't enforce it for new residential structures because it's not clear and objective. The should to shall, I think, makes it possible for us to require that there be this view line drawn. And I think the way that we've rewritten it, it says it has to remain in line with other existing structures and not extend further out. I think that is pretty clear, and I would feel comfortable arguing that in the Luba case.
In a way, that's defining the word minimize that's there, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's where like words, this is the feedback I've been given, is words like should and minimize and to the greatest extent possible, those aren't clear and objective. But
But by adding that last part, it makes it
I think so.
clearer.
I think so. Clear enough that we would feel comfortable enforcing it.
When did the clear and objective criteria pass on to us? Was that after 2022? Do you recall?
Oh, no, 2020
2020? And then the
or
other reason,
2019.
the only reason I ask, and I agree with the change, but in 2022, we had that landowner that wanted to build a new deck.
Hmm.
And we had a hearing officer representing Bandon at the time, and he agreed with the verbiage in that he denied the permit or upheld the denial of the permit because of the view line issue. So at that time, clear and objective was still a standard, but I agree with you. It makes sense to change that word or wording to make it a little stronger.
Yeah, well, because it was a deck, it was an accessory structure. So we have considered those not residential, right? They're not, you're not building a new home. You're not, the clear and objective standards came from, the idea was to make it easier for people to build housing. So the argument that we made is that any accessory structure, you're not contributing to housing. It's an accessory, component. And then we could enforce the view line standard.
Okay. And you're happy with this change, you'd be happy with our verbiage that defines view line as it is? Because I know over the last 5 years, since I've been participating in the planning commission, every now and then the issue comes up again. And I don't know that we ever changed it. I know there was a lot of discussion, but I think ultimately it just keeps getting deferred. But if you're happy with the current verbiage with this change, I think that's a very positive thing.
Yeah, I think I'm happy enough. I still,
Okay.
I mean, my personal opinion to your point about Strawberry Drive, like I think there's still probably an even more clear and objective route to go, which is literally drawing a line or stating that the line is X amount of feet back from the bluff, like something that's measurable and visible, that someone could come in and actually see where the view line is. I think that's the ideal standard. I think the language that this is what Commissioner Pressler proposed, I think it puts us in a much better place to feel like we can enforce it.
Okay.
So I'm
Yep,
gonna
I
say
agree.
good enough.
I agree. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. Okay, so that's everything that I have. So I will do an update to the packet that you all received last month with the changes that we discussed, and then your homework is to think about those two items. So the mixed use live work cell and then the public park and recreation facility. I think those are the two that we really need to keep thinking about. Okay,
And Dana, could you send us that slide presentation just so I can remember what my homework is?
I will. Yeah, I'll send a follow-up email with the slides and those particular questions. Thank you. Perfect.
I have one more question about the view line.
Yeah.
So if we do not change it to the proposed language under the way it's currently written, would they be allowed to build on the lot on Strawberry Drive because it's not clear and objective?
So, yeah, I mean, they, any criteria in our code that aren't clear and objective are generally not enforceable on residential projects.
So by making this change, we're essentially making that lot not buildable at this point?
No, it's definitely still buildable. I think that, the way that it's written,
But it will like significantly impact where they can build on, like it makes the lot.
I think I'll have to look back at that particular lot. But we can double check that too before we
Okay, I
pass
just don't
something.
want to
Yeah,
negatively impact someone without thinking through. If this,
But I will defer to Commissioner Pressler, but I think her opinion is that the use of the word should has no legal bearing. It's very,
Oh, no, I disagree with
No,
that.
I- You think
I
should,
think should is enforceable. I think as it is, it's clear and objective, but I appreciate that some people think should is not enforceable. So I can tell you that it's always been interpreted until recently as a shall.
okay,
Because it was told to me, I have to stay behind in building behind the view line. So it's been interpreted in the past as a shall, even though it said should.
Okay.
But I totally agree that whatever we can do, you know, since it's been interpreted as shall, we might as well use the word shall.
thank you.
Yes, and so we had always used it as a shall, like this exists, and the council's made multiple determinations further sort of defining what this view line looks like. And then we've had that case with the hearings officer who sort of stated like, this is a little iffy. You might want to fix this next time. And we've had the same feedback about our geologic assessment or our hazard overlay zone, where the language uses minimize and to the greatest extent possible and should. We've had 2 hearings officer cases that where the result has been that we need to we can't enforce those policies. So I agree. I mean, we've always operated that way until we're told otherwise. So I think yeah, my feedback would just be to, if it's a small change from a should to a shall, let's do it to make it a little bit safer for us if we go to Luba. But I'll think about Strawberry Drive and then see if there's any other language that can be worked in to make that more amenable for that.
Are there, how many other Strawberry Drives are there?
I don't think there are any. I mean, we've kind of drawn the line just even on a map with a pen, and there aren't only that section because it's like this curve. Does it make it more challenging?
Because it seems to me that in order to protect the integrity of how neighborhoods are laid out, I mean, there are properties which are not squares and they're not rectangles, they're triangles, or there's some other configuration. And is there a way to identify that in the code that we can, in the event of a, you know, isosceles triangle, we can, which makes development more challenging, the city can apply measurements to certain things, you know, or, you know what I'm saying? It's,
Absolutely. I think you're getting at where we lost the city council last time because
That's where we bogged down the last time, right? Yeah.
Guys, we
And-
talked about like there being, so with clear and objective, you can have a clear and objective path, like this one that would limit that guy's property. And then, I don't know if it would, but potentially. And then you can have the non-clear and objective path, which is discretionary, that would be a decision of the planning commission to allow a different configuration. So as long as you have the clear and objective path, you can have an alternative path. But when we got there, the council was like, take that off of this code cleanup. It's too complicated.
Yeah, I don't know that we should spend an inordinate amount of time on 2 properties on Strawberry. That's just my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm gonna see if I can come up with anything else that makes it easier, but that might be maybe add to your homework is think critically about the view line. I think there's some people who really passionately want to have it remain because it's worked on Beach Loop. If you look at it, I mean, the properties are really built in line with each other for the most part. Or if this is not something we want to include.
Well, and if I may, I
Yeah.
just think you're protecting people who've already, you know, have properties based on the city telling them you shall do it this way. And so what you're saying now is if you're not going to enforce it, if a house burns down, someone can build beyond and block someone's view line. And that just doesn't seem right to me. I mean, it seems like we should protect the view lines of the existing properties who have been made to abide by the view line ordinance.
I think the view line, it's important to have it,
Mhm.
definitely. Because otherwise it's a free-for-all, as you know.
Yes.
And somebody coming in and 2024 and building a two-story house can completely obstruct the view of somebody that's been here since 76. I just consider that to be criminal. So it's important to have it.
I agree, and I think, yeah, I also am thinking out loud or just wondering then if those particular properties that would be maybe negatively impacted by adopting a more strict view line, if that's the opportunity if that's the rare opportunity for a variance, because they would have a unique property quality that would be different than everybody else around them. So we can think about that too, that if we can't go the alternate route path, that then we just know that the variance path would be possible for them. So we wouldn't be completely precluding them from building or building further out or something, maybe a more reasonable arc or something like that.
Right now, view line is strictly bluff side homes, correct?
That's correct.
Are there not a lot of, I don't know a lot, are there not some cities that have view lines that protect structures sited behind?
There may be, I mean, I did talk to someone who, when I said our view line ordinance is confusing, and they said, oh, you should have seen the one where I came from, and you had to take all these pictures out of windows to guarantee what your view looked like. So I do think there's probably other places that try to protect views from different areas. The city council did clarify in a appeal decision in the early 2000s, I can't quite remember when, but it only applied to bluff adjacent properties.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yes.
Any more comments? All right,
Okay, thank you.
we're done with this.
We're done.
All right, Gorse Management Update. Presentation, step forward.
Okay, so I'll just introduce really briefly, because I'm not sure you guys have met Jason Kroll before, but he's our vegetation management coordinator. He's been here for a year and a half, two?
Paid since 2023.
Okay,
Yeah.
but volunteer before that. And I asked him to come here tonight and just give you a little overview about what he's been working on. And so please listen and then ask any questions. And over to you.
Yes, please ask questions if you have any. This is the only slide I'm presenting you, but I've given you a packet with various information about forest treatment in general. And I want to start with our district plan map, which was the first map, which is a significant change to the prohibited vegetation ordinance that was made in with the amended ordinance in 2019, so that we could have a more orderly progression through the city year by year. So the starting with District 1, which I think actually began in 2020, we are now we've added basically a district a year until now in 2024. We started District 4. Next year we will begin District 5 and so on. What you don't see here are actually additional areas of the urban growth boundary, like Sunset City to the south of city limits, and our airport area off to the east, which are also included in the Gorse abatement program. Sunset City, amazingly enough, is far ahead of Beach Loop for compliance. It's a very organized group of neighbors that have proactively been working ahead of our enforcement program. So if you ever have a chance to go look on the bluff, specifically at Sunset City, you'll see work that's many years ahead of folk call from me, basically. So this outlines a typical idealized year beginning in January, when I would introduce a new district. I would reach out to owners of property that has gorse on it, which itself is a change from when I started. We were just sending out letters to everybody in the district, which was good, I would say, for raising awareness, but a lot of unnecessary letters. And most of the responses I got back were from people that supported the ordinance but didn't have gorse. So moving forward, I will be reaching out personally in January of the year that we introduced the district and either knocking on a door, making a phone call, sending an email, introducing myself. And often a site visit is probably the first point of contact I would make with a homeowner. If they have questions about their site and the gorse on their property and what treatment methods are available. Typically, if the site allows, the first treatment would be to cut the gorse to the ground, either by mulching it with a machine, with a hand crew with chainsaws. A homeowner with a pair of loppers with a limited amount of gorse could do that. The follow-up treatment, which typically is herbicide, but does not have to be, would kill the regrowth that resprouts from the gorse cut in the initial year. Non-chemical options are available. There's no real magic bullet. There's a lot of work required, a lot more work and persistence, and many times, multiple times per year, cutting back the gorse to basically wear it out. But whether property owners are using chemical or non-chemical methods, competing vegetation is ultimately what will prevail, I think. And the easiest vegetation that I'm recommending in the first years of treatment is grass seed, perennial, cool season perennial grass. Perennial ryegrass is the easiest one of those to get and the cheapest available at a feed store. But you're mainly trying to cover any bare ground so that gorse seed will be deprived of sunlight and the conditions it needs to thrive. So, like I said, this is a very idealized view of a calendar year. There are seasonal factors that affect contractor availability, and some of these contractors that do the mechanical work are tree services. So when we have a windstorm like we just had, if we have an ice storm like we might have in January, they could be offline for a month in various parts of the state and not available to do scheduled work. They have hunting season in the fall. They disappear September, October for a whole month sometimes until they get their elk or their deer. So there are some periods of the year when fire season is another one where mechanical treatments can be limited by the time of day or entirely shut down during certain months based on the fire risk. But what I've shown here is that there are many months of the year where I'd say at least 6 months of the year that are wide open for gorse work to proceed. I provided a gorse action group demonstration plot findings. And these were plots on 101 by Currydale, where the gorse action group trialed different methods and compared them for efficacy in reducing the gorse population. And they had pure monoculture stands of gorse out at Currydale that they were trying the different methods on. And the main takeaway is that you need to cut it and then be prepared to treat regrowth year over year without any lapse that would permit seeds, plants to start producing seeds again. Mm-hmm. And that's the main thrust of our enforcement is just to reduce flowering and seed production. Whether we'll ever get rid of every last gorse is debatable, but we can be reducing seed production. And looking for yellow flowers during the wintertime is the best time to see where the gorse is. So this time of year, I'm encouraging homeowners to look and look for yellow. Mm-hmm. Because other times of year it can get swallowed up in the other vegetation, depending on its size or how much of it there is. I've given you some photos of before and after. These all happen to be bluff sites that were done in 2023 and 2024. The The bluff required a hand crew with chainsaws because we could not get equipment on it. There without damaging the bluff and causing more erosion. And to find that contractor out of Florence was very difficult. So it's a very specialized labor force, specialized to our area, and we're lucky to have these guys doing the work. The hand crew costs, I estimate under 30 cents a square foot, which depending on how you look at it, might be expensive, but I think it's the deal. Especially when the alternative is doing it yourself, because I don't know many landscapers here that have been willing to take on gorse clearing for their clients that they're doing regular landscaping services for. I've given you some just gorse action group materials about timing and there's a slide here that's coming from an upcoming contractor training that mentions defensible space. And a lot of this work is funded by the state fire marshal. And the conversation about defensible space and risk reduction by getting rid of a very volatile fuel, which is what gorse is to them, has made this project a pretty important thing to them. And so they actually just gave us $60,000 more to do directly to pay for contractor work in the urban growth boundary rights of way, where we will not be doing work because it's not city right of way, and where the county unfortunately will not be doing work because they are not prioritizing gorse clearing in the majority of their rights of way within our urban growth boundary. For example, the donut hole, which is riddled with rights of way with gorse that the county has no expectation of clearing themselves. So in the next 2 years, we will be paying for that work with the state farm.
Nice.
So Jason, what's the strategy for eradicating gorse that's on a steep bluff?
Mm.
That's actually stabilizing the bluff. How do you not destabilize it?
So this actually came up earlier this month at the city council meeting, and
Should have been there.
it's a myth that gorse contributes to stabilizing the bluff, and there's some evidence that it actually contributes to destabilizing steep slopes because of its root structure and because of its top heavy canopy, which can become heavy with water and moved around in the wind. So our native vegetation is the most resilient mix of plants you could possibly have to keep the bluff stable and safe from wildfire risk.
So
And-
ryegrass actually has a better root system to stabilize it than gorse does?
Ryegrass and grasses in general, I consider an interim revegetation technique because the grass is not affected by the herbicide that we use to kill gorse, whereas other broadleaves would be killed. So we're working around native plants when we're doing chemical treatments on gorse regrowth on the bluff or anywhere. You're working around existing native vegetation. The ryegrass, I would say, for several years is going to be covering bare soil, reducing gorse from sprouting, reducing the amount of gorse that sprouts from seed, absorbing the impact of rain that would otherwise hit bare soil. Has a pretty extensive fibrous network, root network closer to the surface. Yes, it's not, it's not like a woody plant that would have a more extensive deep taproot system. But in terms of plants that are more permanent vegetation that are also easy to use, not everybody is a fan of, but the willows that we have growing on the bluff are probably the best tool we have. Because they're easily propagated and they're free. You could put a stick in the ground, and with the right conditions, it will root. And that's what the hand crew that worked on the bluff in June will be going back through and putting out willow stakes for certain clients that have requested it.
Well, they're deep roots too, right? They have a deep root system.
The willow is pretty extensive. It seems to really thrive on the places on the bluff where people are sending their stormwater down with tight lines toward, and so if you just see a cluster of willows towards the toe of the bluff, it's probably because someone's rain gutter water is outfalling there.
Hmm.
But there is also perched water that we've seen that comes out of the bluff too. So they need water, but they need water to establish. But they can survive seasonal drought pretty well.
And the willow would it would protect the ground from getting the seeds too. I mean, when it like choke out the gorse.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Shading out the ground is the answer to, if for anyone that hasn't heard it already, the seed is incredibly long lived.
Right.
At least 30 years.
That's what I heard.
So it will be there, waiting to catch sunlight in theory, for that period of time. And the best you can do is kind of grow over the top of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Where are our responsible dump sites? Do we use Beaver Hill if someone is
Yep.
just? Beaver
Yeah,
Hills?
I can't remember the cost. It might be $50 a load.
Okay.
to Take it there and they burn it.
Do they burn it up
Okay.
in that
Yeah.
burn pile in the
Yep.
back? Okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
And some people are still hauling it off. It's certainly not required. I think it's often for aesthetic reasons that people don't want to see the decomposing material, and that's fine. I don't think there's any additional fire risk even to larger cut material left on the ground
Oh,
to
okay.
decompose. The needles fall off really quickly. And once that is all in contact with the soil, other stuff starts sprouting and growing through that pretty quickly.
Okay.
But if you've ever seen after a mulcher has been through a mature gorse patch, you're left with 6 to 8 inches of really finely chipped material that itself smothers out a seed bed. So, which you can plant into. So.
Now, is there precautions made on hauling it to the landfill?
There's no
Because that's
regulation.
been one of the issues
Yeah.
of
Scattering the seed.
scattering the seeds.
Yeah, there's no regulations, there's no prohibitions against moving it around, unfortunately. The best practice is obviously to tarp or cover. The best practice, if you had to move it, would be to move it when there was not seed on it. So, which is actually can be difficult to find a time of year when that seed is not still on it. These coming months where the new flowers are starting would probably be the best time to be moving around if you had to reduce the risk of spreading seed. But yeah, tarping your load is definitely a recommendation.
Well, it was in the tires too, it was in the tire treads.
Do you mean the actual equipment?
Yeah.
Yeah, so equipment hygiene is the number one lack of equipment hygiene for heavy equipment, whether it's construction equipment or forestry equipment, is the number one reason this is deposited in the places it is. You'll find pure stands of gorse that grew up after a clear cut around the county.
Right.
It established faster than anything else could, and it choked everything else out. And tires are definitely a vector. Tires, shoes, bike tires at Whiskey Run, animal paws. I mean, yeah, there's no reason. It's a tiny little bean that could adhere to
Yeah,
any surface.
I've looked at them.
So, I find it popping up on my driveway from time year to year.
Okay.
I think that's all I have. If you guys don't have any more questions.
Any more questions? All right.
I
thank
just
you.
want to say thank you for all the work you do.
Yeah, and I was just gonna add in too, Jason is such a resource that if you here or anyone listening has questions about how to best remove it on your property or how to identify it or anything like that, we do have a great wall of materials in the lobby here by the planning department, but Jason is available Tuesday through Thursday.
Absolutely.
And I'll just put in a plug too. Jason mentioned the state fire marshal grant that he just received, but he also received a grant before that, which covers the majority of the cost of his position. It's very rare for us to find someone who funds their own position that doesn't really cost much to the city. And so we're just really grateful that he is continuing to use that money to get even more money for our community. So thanks, Jason.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jason.
All right. Planning Department report.
All right, I just have a couple things. So for those of you who weren't there on Monday, we did give a presentation to the city council about the FEMA regulations that are changing. We will default to the permit by permit process on December 1st. We still don't really know what that means. So we're still learning. FEMA had promised that they would get additional guidance out by the middle of November, which we have not yet received. So we are hoping that by December 1st, we will have something. The other thing that I just want to note is we've been updating a page on the city's website under hazard planning. So under planning and then hazard planning, there's the FEMA floodplain regulations. I've been loading everything that's FEMA's been giving me up there. I will put a link to the presentation there as well, so folks can check it out. Do you have a question? No.
Yes, when you
Yeah,
have a chance.
go for it.
I'm I'm still a little confused about, so obviously December 1st is very quickly approaching, especially with the last 2 days of next week, City Hall being closed. So this is almost a moot question. However, if someone owned property, say in the Jetty, and they submitted an application to the planning department on Monday, is that considered, if that application is approved, even if it's after December 1st, is that considered grandfathered in?
Yes,
It
that's,
is.
that's a great question. Yeah, so when you apply, the rules at the time you apply are the rules that you are held to throughout the length of your application.
Okay,
So it's very common that right before rules, regulations change, we've had this happen in the past, that there's a bunch of people who hand in applications all at once. So
okay,
I do anticipate receiving some next week.
right. yeah.
We'll see how that goes, but yes, certainly. So if you have a property in Old Town or on the Jetty, you could submit something up until the end of the month.
And if that application was incomplete, it would still be considered filed in a timely manner prior to.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay,
And then they would have 30 days to make it, or for us to deem it complete or incomplete, and then 180 days to get us that completed material.
Great.
So there's still time.
thank you.
Yes, and we will continue to provide updates on the FEMA materials. I know that it's a huge change and it's very confusing, and we are trying to learn alongside you. The other thing I wanted to note is that the city will be putting up our holiday lights on Monday. They'll go up on City Hall and in Old Town for the Night of 10,000 Lights that happens the Saturday after Thanksgiving. So if there's a bunch of trucks in the way in Old Town, my apologies, but they'll be getting all of our beautiful lights up. There was a question about what's going on with our transportation system plan. The update there is kind of, I'll go way back to, I think, May, when the Planning Commission and City Council had a joint work session to discuss the transportation system plan. There was one item that we did not feel comfortable continuing to or passing on, which was Highway 101 and whether or not that should have a reconfiguration of lanes. ODOT was gracious to provide us with some additional funding to extend our contract with Parametrics and then do additional public outreach to our community specific to Highway 101. So we are working on organizing a public event on February 10th, which is a Monday. More information on that will be available as we get closer, but we are looking to invite the community to provide input on Highway 101, and then we'll be specifically trying to engage businesses or just property owners in general in that area who would be affected by any sort of major lane reconfiguration change. Any questions on that? Okay, and so then my last one is, I don't have anything for us for December, so I would normally say we should cancel our meeting. But we used to always have a pizza party before COVID, so I wanted to see if you would like to get together for a pizza party, but move it up a week to December 12th. I believe that's the Thursday. Is everyone around then? And you can let me know later, but I would ask that we cancel the December meeting because we don't have any pressing business, and then we can just meet for fun.
I won't not be here because I won't want to be, but I'm going to be at my grandson's band concert.
Oh, is that at the school here?
It is.
Okay, well, we can pick, maybe I'll email you about a different pizza party night. But if it's okay with you, we'll cancel the December 19th meeting. Okay, I'm hearing no. Great. And I think that's all I have. Do you have any questions for me?
Yes. For the Night of 10,000 Lights, are we going to tow the trolley down for Santa and Mrs. Claus?
Yes, the
That's good.
trolley is making its way to Old
One
Town.
way or another?
One way or another. I joked, I was like, even if we just take everything out of it and roll it down the
Roll
hill.
down the hill there.
Yes, yeah, it'll be parked in the same spot as last year, for Santa and Mrs. Claus. That was a big hit. We want to be able to use our favorite trolley, so yeah, it'll be down there. The trolley is parked at City Hall in the old fire hall. Oh, well, the reason why we don't operate the trolley anymore is that it's not ADA accessible. And so in order to make it ADA accessible would be extremely expensive. No, we did put some money in the budget till this year to see if we could purchase another trolley or see if we could purchase the lift that would be required in it. I don't know, but my guess is that it'll come up again during this next year's budget meeting. And either they'll take that money and put it sort of in a savings account to pay for a nicer one, but they're not cheap. I mean, we got the one that we have now for very little money, but the more legit ones are way more.
There's
expensive.
not that many around either
No,
that are for sale. So
yeah, I think they-
lucky we got the one we got.
yes, that's true. I think they were looking at one that was in New Jersey and I said, I'll drive it back. That would be fun.
I was gonna say, I know they used to have one in Jamestown, New York area.
Yeah, so so if you want to see a trolley, I mean, that's always a good thing to bring up during the budget season. Anything else?
All right, commissioner comments?
I do.
All right.
I'll make it quick. I just want to thank everybody in the city hall in general on how hard they're working on all the issues that constantly are coming up and things are changing. And my understanding from your FEMA meeting was the federal government doesn't like to be pinned down on anything. So you have such a challenge and I just appreciate all of you and thank you.
So I have a comment as well. I didn't attend the city council meeting this week, but I did watch the video of it. And my comment is that even though this particular endeavor, which prompted by a lawsuit for FEMA, is inconveniencing, its rollout is inconvenient and it's unclear and it's creating chaos, et cetera, et cetera. There's a very good reason why this is happening.
Mhm.
And I think that people are worried, of course, about their own properties and what they can, worried about losing money, et cetera, et cetera. But there's a very good reason why we have an Endangered Species Act. If the more animals that become extinct, the closer we get to extinguishing ourselves. And and so I think that we need to be reminded of that. Even though this is inconvenient, this FEMA action is not in a broader term, is not a bad thing. And it's not governmental overreach, in my opinion. That's my editorialization.
I'll just echo Sally's thank you to everyone that works for the city, especially when we have a day like a couple of days ago with a power company that did such a great job getting things up and running. And the folks that came in and staffed the phones late at night to take down areas that were still out. So thank you to that. And as an aside to Gordon's comment, I would just say I feel the best government is the local government. And the further you get from the local government, the less people are responsive to individual needs and responsibilities.
Well said. Anything else? All right, we're going to adjourn this regular session of the Planning Commission at 8:25. And we're going to move into this committee for citizens involvement and call it to order, same time.
Yes, and I will introduce another. It's so nice that I don't have to be the only one speaking tonight. I'm going to introduce our planner, Solon DeCrozic, who you met. She is our rare AmeriCorps member who's working on a couple projects this year, one of which is an update to our citizen involvement program. She's got a presentation for you about what the citizen involvement program is and some of the stuff she's already learned. And we have, again, a little fun opportunity for you to interact with her. So she's gonna present from over there. She's got a little microphone and presentation. Solon, take it away.
Hello, can you hear me? Yay, okay. Hi, I'm Solon, as you just heard. I'm doing a presentation on the Citizen Involvement Plan and the Committees for Citizen Involvement, which is y'all. The agenda tonight for this presentation, I'm gonna quickly go over Goal 1, DLCD Land Use Goal 1 through the State of Oregon, go over the Committee for Citizen Involvement, go over the Citizen Involvement Plan, over some research, some proposed improvements, a timeline, a survey, a mentee, and then some questions and suggestions at the end. Just off the bat, the reason why I'm doing this presentation is because of Oregon Land Use Goal 1, which is the opportunity for citizens to be involved in all phases of the planning process. And through this goal, it dictates that every Oregon city and county is required to have a citizen involvement plan, which we do. So going on to the Committee for Citizen Involvement, currently our Planning Commission is banned in CCI, which is very common across the state. Like Salem's CCI is also their Planning Commission. And the role of the CCI is to monitor and encourage public participation in planning. Moving on to the Citizen Involvement Plan, essentially it's a program designed to promote widespread and equitable public participation that outlines how citizens will be provided opportunities to be involved in all stages of the planning process. And it serves as kind of like a guideline for the work the CCI does. And specifically, the CIP addresses 6 things. The first one is opportunities for widespread public involvement, effective two-way communication with the public, the ability for the public to be involved in all phases of the planning process, making technical information easy to understand, having feedback mechanisms for policymakers to respond to public input, and adequate financial support for public involvement efforts. So currently, I've been doing some research to understand what the CIP and the CCI is so that I can properly do recommendations. So the first thing that I did was I met with DLCD Goal 1 Specialist Cindy Kramer. We had a great meeting. She gave me a lot of good advice on how to proceed with my research. One of the recommendations that she gave was looking at other city CIPs for best practice information and inspiration, especially other rural communities. And then I'm also conducting a survey right now to get a baseline knowledge of how Bandonites want to be communicated with by their local government and by the planning department, which you'll do that survey later, so foreshadowing. Some of the current proposed improvements that I have just off the bat is changing the language from citizen involvement to community involvement or engagement as to make it less alienating, because for some people, the term citizen can be a little alienating. Another one is have new measures of success be implemented so that we have a better idea of how the code will, like what impact the code will have, and have a measurable ability to do that. And then the last one is identify how we can engage underrepresented communities like young adults, or just other underrepresented communities that I would love to be identified if you would do that later. A quick timeline of what this process is going to look like. The last update to the CIP was done in 2003. I was a year old. So going on to fall of 2024, that's when I became a staff member, and that's when I evaluated the current CIP. Going into winter through spring, which is what we're in right now, I'm going to be collecting data through surveying, hosting community events, doing a town hall, and other stuff to figure out how to make this better. And then at the end of my service term, which is going to be in July, yes, July, which is summer, I'll have a new update to the CIP informed by the data that I gathered and the input I received from the community. So now, this is the fun little survey that I made. You can either use your tablet or a phone to scan the QR code, or if that doesn't work for you, you can type out the form link, but I wouldn't recommend it. It'll take a couple of minutes to do, not even a couple of minutes, it'll take like a minute or two. And it's just gathering information on how you want to be communicated with. So yeah.
And I'll just say too, we'll post this presentation on the agenda page and then I'll send it all out to you. So if you don't have an opportunity to do it this evening, you will still be able to take it later.
You just put up your camera and then just point it and it will come up.
So we have a citizen comment
Should work.
Yeah, I
about
got
the
that.
CCI, wondering why we don't have
Yep.
community members involved.
And then it should.
And
the yellow-
that I
little
say
square will come
because
up.
the planning commission is the CCI, that is why,
don't-
but yeah.
When allowed. to
I know, we assumed that responsibility. I don't know how long. 6
then you
months,
should-
year. I'm not-
Okay.
To come up.
So
And
what have
go
you
to
heard?
the
How come we don't
website.
have?
There's a yellow bar that came up.
From
at
what
the
I've-
bottom.
Citizens involved.
From what I've heard, it's just because we're such a small community that we don't have enough people to represent like a
And where does this?
CCI on top of having a planning commission,
Um,
which is why
put
the
her
CCI was
down.
absorbed by the planning commission. But I'm open to feedback from the community and seeing if people would actually be willing to form another CC, like a new entity, but yeah, I don't really have a good answer at that moment,
Mhm.
at
I-
the moment.
I think I can hop into the question was why don't we have community members on the CCI? Did I hear it correctly?
Yes, yes.
So we did have one, but it is challenging for us to staff multiple committees. So just in terms of how we allocate resources, it was a determination of the city council that it was appropriate for the planning commission to serve that role. Also because you are pretty knowledgeable about who comes to these meetings, who's participating in public comment. It seems like the people who are experiencing who's showing up and who's not might also be a good body to provide us with feedback about how to get different types of people here or
Right.
different types of people engaged. But really what it comes down to is just the city has limited resources and it was a decision to combine committees as much as possible.
It was kind of a rhetorical question.
Sure.
I just wanted to see if what she had to say in
Sure.
terms of the
It
gossip
was a
that she'd
test.
heard.
It was a test.
Gossip she'd heard about why there weren't more citizens involved in this.
Yeah, but I think the opportunity will be when we have public outreach events for citizens to come and provide feedback.
Well, and I think basically, you're not going to have much involvement unless you feed people.
That is my number one rule at every meeting is have food. Have food and something to look at, because otherwise people don't pay attention.
That's right.
It's why the presentation looks nice, because you gotta have something be engaging. Also, I highly encourage people in the audience to also take the survey. I'm distributing it around town, so I want as many people in Bandon as possible to take the survey, so if you want to take the survey, please do. And let me.
There are surveys, so there was just a question, there are surveys that are, posters around town that have this QR code. So yeah, it's meant for everyone in the community to take it.
However, the posters currently distributed around town, the QR code does not work, so.
Okay, so hold on.
Ignore those posters. There will be new posters that will have a working QR code.
Can the QR code be put on the website or something that the manager sends out?
Yeah, I, in the December newsletter, I have the survey link in it, but they didn't have enough space to put the QR code on the printed paper. But the link is in the city manager's newsletter for December, which you can find online and then click the link from there and they'll take you to the survey.
Perfect. That might get more.
Yes, and we can also put it on our Facebook page.
Oh, perfect. That will get some of the younger people to
Mhm.
respond.
Not, not to encourage what used to be the Chicago method of voting, but is it possible for one person to submit more than one survey? Is there any sort of a fail safe? Because and I remember in the past, a former city manager
Okay.
implied that people had stuffed the ballot box on one of the surveys that we had submitted. So I didn't know if there was something built in, sophisticated enough to detect that, or are we just hoping people are honest and
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, I did not consider people stuffing the ballot box for this survey.
probably not. Yeah, especially this survey, it's not controversial. Yeah, like the other survey was, as I recall. Okay,
But yeah, the way that I did the survey, it doesn't ask for your email, so I don't know if I have like knowledge if people are gonna submit more than one. I'm hoping that they don't.
Probably not.
Also, I don't see
It
why they
just
would.
gave me the option of doing it again, though.
Yeah.
I will tell you that. At the end of mine. Like,
My feeling is that if someone
won.
is so passionate about community involvement that they want to take the survey more than once, then we want to hear from them more than
Yeah.
once.
Honestly, nothing on that survey was controversial.
Yeah.
no, I
That's
agree.
true, nothing
Mhm.
on this.
There's nothing prejudicial or controversial.
It's simply data collection.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on from the survey, we're gonna do a Menti. So what you're gonna do is open up whatever web browser you have. Also, people in the audience, I encourage you to do this too if you would like to participate. And you're gonna go to menti.com up there. And then once you have the website loaded, it's gonna prompt you to enter a code. The code is gonna be 24170330. And I'm using this website to collect answers and ideas for this question that I developed, which is imagine a reality where all people in Bandon had knowledge of the planning process. What would this look like and how could we achieve this? And I want to use this time and these answers to help me just like inform the work that I do moving on from this point. I'm going to take all these answers and compile them into some sort of like Google Doc and just have it for my own research essentially.
It's taking me to the second question when I go on
Nope.
Mentimeter, if you want to go.
That's so fun. Let me. Do.
The code number again is 2147.
417.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm not,
Oh,
I'm just getting short answers are recommended for any questions or
all I have.
suggestions.
Yeah, I think it's taking us to the second page. So can we, maybe if we go back? See, this is fun. We're testing these new survey things on you.
Yeah, it's not, I don't think it's getting us where you want us to be.
Oh, if you refresh your page, it's working now.
What was the code again?
24170330.
Thank you. Since I tried to do it a different,
And you should have the question, imagine a reality.
I've got that one now.
Okay. And then write something, and then you'll see right up on the screen, it's gonna show up.
And for anyone on Zoom, you can also participate by going online to the Menti and putting in the code. I'll put it in the chat so that if you can't see the screen for whatever reason, you'll have the code.
Okay, so I just entered something, so you can see that then everyone can see what you say. But it's not, it doesn't say like came from Dana. So I think this is a really good example, though, of tools that we could use if we had some sort of town hall event, and we wanted to ask people questions, and there isn't really enough time to get to every single person, maybe standing at the podium, but a good way to sort of move rapidly through things. This is just a great example, I think, of using technology to help us get more data from more people. And so we could can we put this, like, someone could answer this later? Or no?
So the Menti, it's gonna expire in 2 days.
Got it.
So that's why after this, I'm gonna like quick fire write all these things into a Google Doc. But we could do the same process again, or I could find a different platform that has the same type of like collection of answers that doesn't expire, but this is what I know.
Oh, no,
I've
this is
used it
perfect.
before, so I figured I'd stick to my basics for now.
So I think, do you want to, I can read them off if you want, or can you read them?
I'll read them.
Okay.
Some of the ones that we have right now are more people at public meetings, people would join and participate in meetings, the public, or, I need to put my glasses on, I can't see. The planning commission meeting room full, or, my apologies, the planning commission meeting room would be packed and Zoom would be full. A more dynamic conversation with more diverse opinions resulting in more creative solutions. I like that one. Everyone would be able to access codes in an understandable format, have multiple locations where they can be found. And people need access to City of Bandon website, personal responsibility. City needs to continuously update their website, city responsibility. Thank you. And then in that same Menti, I also just have a section for any like questions that you have or suggestions. That one was supposed to go to the other one, but ignore that one. That's supposed to be in the previous question. But yeah, does anyone have any questions or suggestions they'd like to give me right now? If you don't want to type it and you just want to say it verbally.
You're asking for questions or suggestions about how to improve the communication in the planning process?
Yeah, just like, or just about the presentation that I gave, questions for me. Yeah.
Our goal is to have them as part of our city planning, our commission meetings, right?
Mhm.
Will they always be at the last part of the meeting?
I don't, I think, are you referencing the question that's up here? I think, or the comment, I think that we could have them before. I mean, if we wanted to meet at 6 to do CCI, or still meet at 7, but start with CCI and then move into planning commission. I don't have a problem with that.
Well,
I didn't even-
I have a conflict with that.
Oh, before the meeting.
Yeah.
But if we started CCI at 7 and then moved into the regular meeting. I think the only issue that comes up is when you have public hearings and we have to notice them for a specific time.
Can we be flexible?
Of course.
I mean.
Yeah.
That way, if we alternate, even if we alternate them, but make it clear which weeks we're going to have it first or which weeks we're gonna have it last, it just might facilitate some people's involvement
Mm-hmm.
rather than possibly make it too hard for them.
You think people don't want to provide public comment at 8:42 PM? How bizarre.
Well, I've been here, I think the one meeting I was here till like about 11 PM. one
Yeah.
time.
Mm-hmm. I think that's great.
I
yeah.
stayed, but not everybody wanted to.
Mm-hmm. I think my other comment to us would be to allow public comment during this committee for citizen involvement. I realized I didn't include a public comment section. So we might add that in case anyone has public comments specifically about what we're talking about tonight.
Right now?
Well, I mean, you can get through the discussion. I just thought it was funny that I didn't put in public comment here, so. Any other comments or suggestions or ideas for Solon?
I may have missed this question and answer. I was scanning the code, but so my understanding is there is not a requirement I'm referring to the letter that Steve Freeland wrote.
Yes.
Is there not an absolute requirement for 3 at-large members from the general public to participate?
I can answer that. So the city's code states that, however, the city council made a decision to assign the planning commission as, actually, I think we amended the code. I'll have to go back and look.
Okay.
I think we amended the code. We didn't amend the comprehensive plan, and we did notify DLCD
Okay.
that because we would be doing this citizen involvement plan update, that we would just incorporate it in that. I don't know if it's, I don't want to call it guidance. I think state law says that we can have the planning commission operate as the CCI. So that's what we've chosen to do. As
Okay.
the city council made a decision to do.
Thank you.
Yes. Anything else?
So I just wonder, beyond meeting the letter of the law.
Mhm.
Does the city of Bandon have any idea? Does it know what it wants to know?
That is a great question. Do we know what we want to know? I think we could always be more informed, but I'm going to be completely transparent. I am so tired that I do not know how to answer that question right now.
That's totally fair. I think,
And you may not know tomorrow morning either, it's
Right.
I think we don't, and that's why we do, but at the same time, I think we don't know how best to reach people, or how people want to be communicated with. I feel like I've given this example before, but I was part of a committee that was trying to reach younger people, and we learned through a survey that they wanted to be texted. And I thought that was the most appalling thing, but that's how people wanted to be contacted about events. And so I think there are ways that we are used to communicating, which is with our agenda packets via email and on the city's website, and other people don't communicate that way. So while we have limited resources, we want to figure out in this list of possible ways to communicate with people, what are the ways that we're going to reach the most people, and have the largest sort of breadth of reach. So yeah, I think we don't know that. I think we don't know that yet. And so that's what we want to figure out through this process, is how do people want to be communicated with? What do they want to know? How do they want to get the information? How do they want to provide feedback? I feel like we've gotten a lot of really good results with surveys, so we continue to do those. But we also get requests for like in-person, more casual meetings that aren't like these sort of regulatory planning commission meetings. So we're going to try some things out and see what sticks or what works really well. There may be things that people love, but we only have like 4 people attend, and those are not going to be the best use of our time. So that's what we're here to do this year. So we don't know what we don't know yet. We're hoping to learn.
It's a fun experiment.
It's fair.
Anything else?
No, if you don't have any other comments or questions, that is all I had.
All
Thanks you
right.
for listening. Yeah.
I'm gonna adjourn the citizen involvement session. And we've had committee commissioner comments, so I'm going to adjourn this session of the planning committee at 8:48
Ish.
ish. Good point.
Thanks,
Oh,
everyone.
yeah.
Thank you.
And any of the handouts that you received this evening, I'll make sure that they're up on the calendar page so folks from the public can get to them as well. And Jan, I will send you everything as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Dana.
Yes, thank you. That's old. That needs to go in my box, and then I need to take the other stuff from last week and put it in here.